What are some not safe for work history facts that don't get taught in school? Please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. In late imperial China, a concubine earmarked for sex by the emperor later at night would be pampered all day. When the night of the deed came, the palace servants stripped the girl naked, wrapped her in a silk blanket, and carried her to the emperor's bed to unwrap her there. This practice wasn't for imperial majesty's kinks, it was a security measure. Sometime earlier, a concubine tried to assassinate an emperor during sex with weapons hidden in her clothing. Queen Victoria instituted a system of certifying prostitutes as syphilis-free. They were called the Queen's Ladies of the Night. Many prostitutes hung the certificate above their beds as a point of pride. The Corps of Discovery only ate meat and had incredible constipation. One day they all ate pills they named thunderclappers, which made them shit out everything immediately, but the pills had mercury in them. So if you go out on the same trail as the Corps of Discovery with a metal detector, you can find the exact place. Lewis, Clark and the rest of the Corps took the biggest shits of their lives. The political smear campaign against Marie Antoinette involved a lot of dicks. Roman brothels had pictures of the prostitutes' specialties above the door to their room. If you ever visit Prague, definitely go to the Sex Machines Museum. I felt so naive of how unaware I was about how horny we as a species have been, since, literally, ever, the steam-powered dildo is a triumph of mechanical engineering. The father of microbiology, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, was the first to examine semen under a microscope immediately after ejaculating in his wife. Alexander the Great had 361 concubines, official prostitutes, 4 more and he would have one for every day of the year. 12-year-old Pocahontas used to entertain white colonists with nude cartwheels. This is actually one of the few things we know about her that's indisputable. The inventor of the bra had a pet whippet named Clitoris. There was a Greek general who was supposed to lead a major expedition to Sicily. The night before he left, he got wasted and walked around Athens with his other drunk friends and knocked all of the penises off of the statues in Athens. This caused him to be arrested. He missed the expedition and they lost almost all of the men they sent to Sicily because only he knew the plan well enough to pull it off. President Lyndon Johnson was obsessed with his dick and loved to show it to people. He called it Jumbo. The first person who was sentenced to the electric chair died horribly. Someone forgot to wet an essential part of the machine and he ended up with bubbling skin, melting eyes and a foaming mouth among other things. The amount of electricity was so strong that he began to convulse violently, so much so that he weakened straps. He twitched so erratically that his index finger dug through the palm of his hand. The entire room smelled of burning flesh, and the stench even permeated some clothes. Many people who came to see had fainted during the execution. But do you know what's even more horrible? They heard him wheezing after they turned the electricity off. Greeks were heavily into sodomy on both sexes. Women were only required to be virgins vaginally prior to marriage. Every other orifice was fair game. During the Age of Sail, anytime a large ship would come into port, the men often wouldn't be allowed shore leave for a few days. So you would see small boats packed with prostitutes heading out to the ship at mooring. Larger ships of the line would have over 500 men aboard, so there could definitely be a couple hundred ladies brought aboard behind the captain's back. And with virtually no privacy aboard, you would have spaces in the ship with hundreds of couples going at it at once. There were definitely a lot of captains that didn't allow any women aboard, so the sailors on those ships would just have to wait until they could go ashore. Catherine the Great had a parlor room filled with explicit, erotic furniture she commissioned personally. We're talking blowjobs carved into chairs, an end table where giant dicks torrential cumshits were holding up a marble countertop, a woman getting eaten out by a demon on a throne. Homegirl had taste. If you look up Edward Russell in history books or even Wikipedia, you learn about his military service, including Admiral of the Royal Fleet for some famous battles. What they don't teach is that he threw a party so epic it's still being talked about 300 years later. In 1694, he threw a party for officers, and with 6,000 guests coming, wanted to make it special. So, he made the world's largest cocktail, drained the garden fountain and used that as a giant punch bowl with hundreds of gallons of liquor, over a half-ton of sugar, thousands of lemons, etc. He hired bartenders to paddle around in boats, scoop it up, and serve it to attendees. At some point, it began to rain, so they put a tent up over the fountain to prevent it getting watered down. About a week after they started, they had drank every last drop, the fountain was dry, and the party was over. Henry VIII, aside from his 3 legitimate children, had at least 6 other illegitimate kids with various mistresses. There is also a suit of armor made for him on display, and the codpiece alone weighs 1.3 kilograms. Newton was so dedicated to his work and abhorred fun so much that many people believe he died a virgin, at 87 years old, and by work I don't mean revolutionizing physics and inventing calculus, I mean alchemy. His main focus was turning lead into gold and making the philosopher's stone. In the 12th century, a philosopher named Peter Abelard challenged the church teaching on sexual morality, pointing out that no ceremony of man could make an inherently immoral act moral. The act would have to be already generally moral. Therefore, sex before marriage really couldn't be considered a mortal sin. He fell in love with the wrong woman and had his nuts cut off. This made him angry and sad. He then wrote a book. Not necessarily not safe for work, but pirates were one of the first people to have a healthcare plan of sorts. If you lost an appendage, there was a predetermined pay for everything that was lost or maimed. Also, there was a pretty large number of female pirates. For a time when women had little to no value in the workplace, they more or less had equal treatment and pay to other pirates. Napoleon would ask that his wife, Josephine, not bathe for several days when he knew he would be coming home. "My man's liked a stinky stinky lady." The creator of the vibrator was George Taylor. It was originally made as a steam-powered device that was used to cure a disease called hysteria, by massaging the pelvic region. Empress Wu Zetian of China asserted her dominance over male officials by making them kneel before her and pleasure her orally. For a long time, royal European women gave birth in front of spectators, who would pour into the bedchambers to watch the babies arrive. Plymouth colony of British North America, New England, convicted and hung a young man committing bestiality. It was one of the first hangings in the New World. The 16-year-old Thomas Granger was hanged to death for indulging in buggery with a mare, a cow, 2 goats, many sheep, 2 calves, an ostrich, allegedly, and a turkey as mentioned in the court report from 1642. His hangman was one John Holmes. Nelson Rockefeller, former vice president of USA, suffered a heart attack and died while having sex with his 25-year-old assistant. He was 70. Jenny Wade was a prostitute and a madam. She wasn't a kind and generous soul who was treating the wounded from both sides of the Battle of Gettysburg. She was offering her services to both sides. When you take the bus tour with recorded audio, the storyteller narrating the tour is supposed an old-timer reflecting on the battle. When you pass the Jenny Wade house, still standing, he says something like, "That's the Jenny Wade house. Jenny was a friend of mine. She was a friend to many." I always liked that subtle nod. In any history course, the rampant raping done by most occupying forces around the world, for example, Japan in World War II. Ancient Greece society was all about butt sex. It gets glossed over or referred to in a passing and vague way. In fact, part of the curriculum of well-off kids, from fancy Athenians to tough Spartans, was being poked from behind by your teacher/tutor. Child grooming was more or less systemic, a necessary step in life for most men. The German army was given methamphetamines during their invasion of France/Belgium/Netherlands in 1940. This was the other part of Blitzkrieg that isn't really talked about. For the first 3 days the German army advanced without rest. No stopping or sleeping for 3 days straight. If you got tired they just gave you more meth. The drug may have also played a role in why the Panzer divisions refused to stop even after being ordered to several times by high command. They only finally stopped advancing when Hitler personally ordered their halt. Plato thought that the babies inherited everything from their parents and therefore from perfect parents having intercourse at the perfect moment would born perfect babies. Imagine an equilateral triangle with the parents in 2 of the corners and the baby in the 3rd. He thought that these babies would be the superior race. Consequently, a political utopia would be originated from a genetic utopia. President Lyndon B. Johnson, as the name implies, was infamous for talking about his penis and boasting how big it was. There's a recording of Johnson arguing on the phone with pants manufacturers about how they failed to leave enough room for the crotch, and actively creating a detailed verbal picture of his presidential groin. When my high school history teacher asked the class what we knew about Johnson, my answer was not what he was looking for but was what I felt the class needed. This actually got taught to me at school, but I think it still fits. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 there was allegedly this absolute unit of a Viking that was killing Saxons left, right and center using only an axe, killing roughly 40 Saxons. He was holding the bridge for some time before he was killed, and this is still somewhat debated amongst historians, by being stabbed in the balls by some Saxons that were floating below the bridge underneath the Viking. 4 popes actually died while having sexual intercourse, or as a result of. Pope Leo VII died of a heart attack during, and Pope Paul II while being sodomized by an altar boy, allegedly. 2 others were supposedly murdered by the cuckolded husband of their lovers. Homosexuals were not considered victims of the Holocaust, and after the war was over they were forced to finish their sentences because homosexuality was still illegal in Germany under paragraph 175, meaning they were still at risk of being imprisoned and incinerated, not generally talked or learned about in schools. John F. Kennedy took the virginity of his 19-year-old intern and had her give another guy a blowjob poolside. He was kinda a creepy dude in general. Okay, man. Wow. So the entire life of Julie D'Aubigny never gets discussed, but it's freaking fascinating. The fact that Lord Byron gets talked about as a playa but she doesn't is a damn dirty shame, but the existence of such a woman shows us a lot about the era she lived in. Julie D'Aubigny was the daughter of the French king's master of the horse, basically, cavalry commander / managed the royal stables. As such, she was trained in horsemanship and swordsmanship as a child, arts at which she greatly excelled. After she got caught canoodling with a minor and other courtier, her dad married her off to some older minor noble, hoping that would quell the scandal. Well, Julie D'Aubigny was not one to simply do what good girls do. So, finding marriage with a somewhat nobody kind of doll, she ran off with her boyfriend. They toured France, going from inn to inn, doing singing and exhibition sword fighting shows, riding on horseback to go from place to place. Well, eventually Julie get bored of her man, so she ran off with her girlfriend, the daughter of a nobleman. Now, when he did find out about the affair, this nobleman did what you do with disgraced daughters at the time: ship her out to a convent and try to make her forgotten. That is when Julie took matters into her own hands, and joined the convent to have hot, illicit, sexy lesbian nun-sex. They left the convent by the only logical route, burning the place down and faking their own death. This, understandably, freaked the lover out a bit, who ran back to her family. The dad had Julie condemned in absentia for kidnapping. Now, remember how I said Julie used to tour France singing? Well, this comes in handy for her now, because Louis XIV, King of France, decides to pardon her and offer her a career at the opera. She'd continue her canoodling ways, having many lovers, both men and women. One evening, she even got into 3 duels against noblemen whose wives she had seduced, and even though they attacked her simultaneously, she defeated them all. She died of unknown reasons at age 33. Her gravesite is, to this day, unknown. A life like this, so scandalous, seems unlikely, but is very much the product of the era. The French king of the time was trying to separate himself from church influence, so to have a lady whose lifestyle was so controversial and unacceptable to religious institutions is basically proof that the king was willing to overlook such things if a performer of good caliber could help promote the prestige of his court. Pretty damn cool, and overall a hilarious tale. In 1920 to 1921 the Bolsheviks had 2 ideas of women's place in society going. One believed in pretty effective equal rights for women, and sexual liberation. The other asserted that the state should assign every worker a woman at age 18 who would meet his needs. Both spoke of sex as a basic human need akin to a glass of water. Much of military history skims over the reality of rape from invasions, apart from the rather short period of gentlemen's war in Europe. War was an expedition of raping and pillaging. After all, you had to convince the general public to join, and they usually cared a lot less about the leader's intentions than you would think. All the way up until the 20th century, peasant households would suck on the penis of infant boys as a means to calm them down when they threw a fit. Somewhat similar. Food was usually chewed by someone then spit into the mouth of children too old to breastfeed but unable to eat solids. Also, if your baby was experiencing a cold and had mucus buildup, it was common to suck it out of their nose before spitting it out. Please subscribe if you like the video. It really helps the channel to grow. Adios.